So what do you think are some of the biggest obstacles facing, Millennial and Gen Zs looking to purchase their first home?
From what I've noticed, I think one of the biggest things is where do you start, right? There's so much info online and from so many other people they know that it just can be overwhelming. So I think it's important to have a step-by-step process and know how everything works. And I think it starts with reaching out to a mortgage broker, figuring out your price range, and then from there, chatting with a realtor to figure out how the process works.
With the home buyers you're dealing with, what tends to be the average age? Because even I know that, some of the stats said that, decades ago or a generation ago, the average age for buying a home was 23. And nowadays it more seems like around the 29-year mark. So what do you see? Like, who are you dealing with?
I've actually had quite a few clients that are around, 24 to 29 that I've been dealing with that are all super excited and they're super organized and ready to go. And it's been a great process.
And then further to that, there's a lot of lending restrictions also at play that tend to take out a lot of these Millennial and Gen Z home purchasers. Do you find that there's a consensus among the younger people that, buying a home is very difficult? Or do you find that there's a lot of optimism that home ownership is still possible? They just have to go the right ways about it.
I think a lot of people think it's possible. And then again, it's just where do they start? And with everything being online now, there's just so much info. There's all these different pre-approval forms people fill out. And it's kind of like, I think it's good to actually chat with someone to know their pre-approval amount. You talk to different people and it's just a wide range. So it's good to have the exact amount.
Do you feel like there's a lot of pressure on these Millennials, on these Gen Zers to adopt almost like a rent culture? Because I know I've seen a lot of financial literature, like the whole rent versus buy thing, and a lot of it's geared at like you don't need to worry about home ownership, don't be afraid to rent and stuff like that, which is not necessarily bad advice depending on like what you're doing, right? But what's some of your thoughts on that?
I think it's good to look at what works for you. Right? Because if you're someone that you're not really quite established, you don't know where you're going to be working in that, renting is that flexibility where you can have more options. But at the same time, if you're going to be somewhere for a while, then a lot of times people don't realize that you can own a home for almost the same price as renting, depending on the situation, right? You're going to have extra costs with insurance, your taxes, all that kind of stuff when you buy a home, but you're putting that towards your equity, right? I think it's really good to look at the options because I think some people just think, oh, I need to rent for a long time before I can buy, and they don't even look at the option of buying when it's a good option and they could actually probably do it.
I agree with that. And I also think that there's a growing trend, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, there seems to be a growing trend, but particularly with these younger buyers, to buy a home only with the mentality of, even if I upgrade, I'm going to keep that home, but I'm going to keep it as a rental, right? Are you seeing a lot of that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Lots of people want to buy a home that's, you could say a fixer-upper, and they want to work with their dad or their grandparents on fixing up a home, living in it for 3 to 5 years, and then keeping it as a rental or flipping it when they upgrade. It's fun because there is so many options. And then on the flip side, sometimes it's not necessarily a home. It's an apartment or a townhouse. Some people are really busy with work and they don't want to deal with maintaining a property. They can buy, a townhouse style where it's all the yard maintenance and stuff is taken care of, or an apartment. It doesn't necessarily need to be a home, right?
Right. And I think on that point too, there's a lot of people who, when they're purchasing their first home, I'm always an advocate, like you don't know what to expect. You don't know all of these things. Like there's a lot of cost to anticipate. Like don't go after the fixer upper unless you have like a certain set of skills, right? Like if you're in the trades or whatever and you have those certain set of skills, you can walk in and be like, that wall is leaning, right? And this is how you'd fix it, right? So that's a set of skills I don't have. But when you're that younger generation, do you find that they're more adverse or less adverse to taking on a project that requires work?
I'd probably say it's like a 50-50. I think people, again, when looking at all the options, they can see what the cost difference is. Some people just like to buy something brand new, or when I go through the different options, some people don't mind looking at something that's older and even getting a quote to see what contractors would charge to put a new flooring, paint, trim, or a new kitchen, and it can sometimes be the same cost as a new build, and you get the mature yard. So I find it's really good to look at all the options, and I think it's really good to be aware too of, I mean, when you go to fix something, you have to go in expecting there's going to be certain things you have to do that you might not have expected. And that's with any home. Even brand new homes have lots of issues. And I mean, that's another topic, but I tell people, I mean, my job is to tear apart homes. And when working with younger people buying homes, I really want to make sure that they're aware of all the possible issues in a home so that they're aware, right? I don't want to hide anything. So I go into houses, I mean, pointing out all the flaws. And I mean, for example, one thing that I find so common in homes is bad grading, right? You have this sidewalk sloping towards the house, or the yard goes right towards the house, and you go in the basement, you can see the windows leaning, and you know there's been deflection in the foundation. So I look for everything, right? And I think when people start to see that, it's overwhelming, but it's important for them to know, and then they feel prepared when they move in, right?
Yeah, and I think it's funny you mention all of that, because when I'm dealing with like younger buyers, a lot of them, you know, because of the role of digital, they can, you know, find their own listings relatively quickly and easy now. You know, we're back in the 80s, you had to like call somebody up or like look through the paper or whatever. It's a lot easier than it was for previous generations to find your own homes. And I find that a lot of them start questioning the value of the realtor in that purchase transaction. Like I remember, and I think for me, the real eye opener was like, this is years ago when I used to sit in like 8-9 years ago when I was first getting started as a mortgage broker. It was like a little while into it. I remember going to a show home. And I used to sit in show homes, and I would like talk with the realtors or whatever as they were like listing their places. And I remember sitting in the living room one time and looking around and being like, wow, that is an ugly ass like rug. Like, I don't know who designed this place, but like that rug does not go with like the rest of the decor in this living room. And so jokingly, I just pointed to it and I looked at the realtor and I was like, someone doesn't have taste. And I pointed at the rug and she's like, actually, that's mine. So of course now I feel embarrassed because I've insulted this realtor's rug, right? I was like, oh, did you? I'm like, what else did you bring in? And then she's like, oh, I didn't bring in anything in except for the rug. I'm like, well, then why did you bring in the rug? And she's like, because the floor is littered with like dog and cat scratch marks, and I wanted to hide the floor. Like, I just felt so skeezy just sitting there with her, right? I'm like, I hope that like whoever comes in here, like, knows enough to, or at least has a realtor who thinks to, you know, pluck up the carpet and be like, what's the condition of the floor like? Because her intention was literally to hide the floor.
It is kind of scary, right? Because you like, people hide things all the time. So it's, on the other end is, I mean, working with a good home inspector that is really going to try and find everything through thermal imaging, questioning things, right? Every house is going to have issues, but it's good to be aware. And if there is too many issues, you back out or you don't buy the house, right? And a lot of times it could be just small things, right, that I'll point out that can easily be fixed. So I think the more they're educated on all the different things that come with buying a home, it makes it a lot less stressful, and they don't have to second guess themselves about what could happen, right?
Yeah, so I totally agree with all that. Do you find then, you know, because we talk about, you know, the presence of tech and stuff like that and finding all the homes on their own, obviously tech is a lot more prevalent. I had read a stat the other day that, you know, 14% of millennial home buyers are now putting offers on places without actually having even seen the place yet. And this is like due to like virtual tours. This is due to, so like commonly when people do that, when they put offers in, is they're migrants, you know, or immigrants. They're from one part of the country or another country entirely trying to purchase something that they just physically can't get to without, you know, actually a substantial amount of effort or cost, right? But millennials aren't that in that sense, right? Like 14% of them are choosing to do it even though they live like in the same city. Like it's a 5-minute, 10, 15-minute drive, but they're still like putting an offer in without seeing it. Do you find that trend is increasing?
I think it is a little bit. I don't notice it as much here in Saskatoon. And I mean, there's definitely pros and cons to it. virtual tours are nice, to have a walkthrough of the property. And I think what I'm seeing more is people might get an agent to go do a FaceTime tour, get the virtual tour so people can see what the house is like. And then that way they can really get a sense. And if they really like it, then they go look at it instead of going to look at 35 houses and wasting time. Then they can know really what house might they really think that they'll like. So I think that's where the virtual tours help a lot. But one thing I like to tell people is that pictures lie. With all the new wide angle lenses and everything, houses look so good, and you go to see them and it looks way smaller. You don't expect it. You miss a lot of different things. So, and it goes the other way too. Sometimes a house will show terrible online if the pictures are really bad or if it's cluttered, but you go to the house and it's actually very clean. There's just a lot of stuff and the pictures weren't very bright and shows better. So there's both sides to it.
Are they actually like sending like realtors out to go take pictures? You're talking about virtual tours that have already been done then, right?
Yes. And I've had clients too where they can't make it to the home. I mean, in a crazy market, you got to see it first day or else it's gone. So sometimes I'll go and do a quick walkthrough, share my thoughts, and then do a quick FaceTime video for them. And then I can point out all the things that you wouldn't be able to see. And again, coming back to if it's bad grading or certain things to the exterior, certain issues that you wouldn't necessarily see just through that virtual tour. So that helps them. And then if I think it's a really good fit for them, then we talk about potentially putting in an offer with conditions in place so that when they do see it, if they want to back out, they can.
Do you find that generally these younger buyers are in a rush to buy, or do you feel like they're like, no, we're young, we've got a lot of time, we can afford to wait?
I think it really depends on their situation. I mean, if they have a good setup where they're at, they start the process early, which is awesome, so that if something does come up, they're ready to go. But if they're not in a big rush, sometimes they like to take their time and really find the home that really suits them. Or yeah, I mean, it really depends. I think a lot of them aren't in a big rush, and they like to take their time, which I think is good. But I mean, I would say it's between, once they actually start looking at homes, it can be anywhere from, I mean, a few days if we find something right away, or a couple months down the road, or depends what the market's doing. If they're not in a rush, sometimes I advise people to wait till things come down, so that they're not overpaying. So it really depends on their situation.
So do you find then that a lot of these millennials, when they are shopping for a home, because like one of the tactics that we typically see is realtors, sending listings out well in advance to try to get people acclimatized to like what is a good deal? Because oftentimes you have no idea what a good deal actually looks like until you've seen like 100 other houses, right? And oftentimes it's really easy to do digitally to show them like, oh, here's the price range of all these houses. And eventually one stands out and you're like, that's a great price, right? Do you find that works particularly with millennials, or do you find that they're already, because they're more of a research type, they're already living online, that they have less shock or less expectations when it comes to, price targeting for certain regions?
Yeah, I know a lot of people I find have already researched and looked at houses for the last few months before they reach out to a realtor. They kind of have an idea where the market's going, or I'll get called and say, hey, I've been watching these places and they seem to be gone right away. So is the market picking up? Or they've already done a lot of research. So when I chat with them, then they're kind of ready to go already.
I feel like a lot of the older generations, they feel that these younger generations are like inexperienced, they don't know what they're doing. And often I find they're actually more informed because of that, right? Like they don't have all these like preconceived notions. They don't have this like history of outdated information. They're just like, what's current, what's whatever. Because I'll often find, like, particularly when I'm dealing with like older clients, you'll see that they've received a few listings or whatever, and they're like, oh, that's too expensive. I'm like, that's a freaking good deal. Like, and it's very clear that they just have no idea what the current prices are like, right? Like they're still thinking they're buying a home for 30 grand.
Right? Yeah, no, exactly.
So what's the biggest piece of advice that you could give to, these younger home buyers?
I would say the biggest thing is buy within your means. I would say buy within your means. Because I feel like a lot of people will say, oh, I'm pre-approved to this, right? And then you'll max out, and then it can cause stress. And I mean, you always want to have a buffer, right? Of things will go wrong in the house. You want to have a little bit of room to play to, whether it's replacing appliances or something down the road. So I would say, yeah, I mean, you don't need, it's your first home. It's going to be, we'll make sure it's a good home, but don't, like, it's your first home. So don't overspend and buy so that you're maxed out on everything, right? You want to be comfortable and have that room to play with so that it's not stressful. And it's yeah, something that I really like to stress to people, because I think it's important for them, and I don't want to sell a house just to sell a house, right? I want to make sure they're comfortable in it, and it's really important for them to not overspend.
I really like that piece of advice. I remember years ago, like back before, the changes in 2015 and 2016 with the B20 and B21 regulations, when people could qualify for a lot more than they can qualify for now, right? Like if you qualify for 300,000 now, you basically could qualify for 600,000 back then, basically, right? Like, I remember the number one question I used to get was, how do I qualify for more? Like somehow that they were like being limited by this monstrous pre-qualification. And I remember like trying to talk so many people off the proverbial edge, in a sense, being like, look guys, you do not need this much home. Like if you're pre-qualified for this, like back then I'd be like, if you're pre-qualified for 600, you want to be buying at like 400, right? And it's very similar now with like price of gas and groceries and everything else going up. My advice still stays the same, right? It's like if you're pre-qualified for 400, you should probably be looking at the 300, 350, range. Like look for something well within your means, right? And then hopefully you have some money at the end of the day to live a life beyond inside your four walls, post-pandemic, I guess.
Exactly. And I think it's super important. I mean, you get your pre-approval amount, but that's why I like to know what that is. And then ideally we can try and find a house that's just lower than your max, right? So that you're not just maxed out on everything, right?